Only if you want to.
So,
That's what she said.
Okay.
yeah.
So they settled down in Sterling in Colorado.
They were there for 3 years.
It's about 2.5
In
hours
Sterling.
north of
North of Fort Collins, where that is now.
yeah, north of Fort Collins. It's close to Wyoming, Nebraska. Sterling. Sterling's on the eastern side of the state.
Yeah, it's northeast of
And
Denver.
so your father grew up and did school and all that in Loveland.
Daddy was, well, they came over in 1916 and he was born in 1899, so he was 17. And I think Daddy probably only had an 8th grade education. But he was one that loved to read, and he liked to be involved in government, and he was instrumental in bringing water from the western slope over to the eastern slope, so the farmers on the east had water to irrigate their crops. And there's a history story there. They had to drill a tunnel through the mountains to bring the water through. And so they started on the west of the mountain and they started on the east of the mountain and then eventually met. I don't know if it was exactly in the middle, but anyway, eventually when they met, they were only a 1/4 of an inch off of digging that tunnel.
Because of their calculation on both sides.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty back in the 40s.
That's an engineering
That's
feat.
pretty amazing in the 40s.
Yeah, they had to have the approval from the United States government to do that.
But still to this day, they use that water in the
To
dry
transport
lands.
water across the mountain range.
Yeah, up in the continental, it's up by the continental divide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's good for farming, but just
Yeah.
doesn't have a lot
Well,
of
they don't have
water
a lot
in
of
that
water.
area.
They just don't get a lot of rain over on the eastern slope, like we do on the western slope.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, so it was amazing. Yeah.
And Daddy was a farmer. That's what he did when he moved to Loveland. He and his brother went into partnership and farmed together. It was called dryland farming, meaning they did not irrigate, but they grew crops like wheat and grain crops and no irrigation. And then he also partnered with a brother in Hudson, which is east of the Denver airport right now. It's out that way. And it was all dryland farming out there also. And Dad would go back and forth. He'd go down there and stay for 2 or 3 days and help his brother plant or disc or harvest, whatever it took. And then he would come back but finally, he was elected to be a superintendent of an irrigation canal. And when that happened, he quit his farming with his brothers, and that was his full-time job. And we moved to what they call the ditch house. And I'm thinking that maybe the ditch company, the Loudon Ditch Company, probably owned that home. And that's where the superintendent stayed, and Daddy was responsible for making sure there was enough water in the irrigation ditch to help irrigate the farms for beets and hay and whatever they needed the irrigation for. Making sure
It was
they
there.
had enough water, and they had to have the order turned in by noon if they wanted water the next day. And so he would take, whether they wanted 2 feet or 3 feet or however many, and then they had head gates that they would open on the farm and let the run the big irrigation ditch into their own properties.
And Grandpa would always run into rattlesnakes when he would be out there on the ditch. And he'd take his shovel and just chop their heads off.
Yes.
Saw him do it on numerous occasions.
Yeah, he had no fear of those rattlesnakes.
None whatsoever. He'd throw that Ford into park and grab that shovel, and it was a done deal.
You just chop their head off?
Yeah.
That's it. Boom. Yep. One fatal swoop. You don't want to mess with that dude.
That's freaks me out.
That green Ford truck.
Remember that green Ford truck?
That's the truck that you take out
That's
out
the
of the line?
one, man. That is the one. That's the only one I ever knew, ever.
What?
That's right.
Crazy.
Yeah. And it smelled like snuff, snooze, whatever. Because he had a big old coffee can in there he'd spit into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's crazy, but true. I can still hear the brake when you go to brake, because you know it wasn't disc brakes back in the time. It was like you would hear it as you were braking. Yeah, it was weird.
Huh.
Yeah.
So when you guys were kids, would he sell from the farming to provide for all of your guys' food and everything, or did he farm anything that you guys had your own probably personal farm that you got a lot of your food from at your homestead, right? But that's not what he was primarily farming in their dry farming, right? That was all for sale to provide for his family, right?
Right, yeah. Well, he would keep some of it to feed. He always had farm animals. Until we moved food, until he retired, he had farm animals. And so part of the grain he would keep for his animals, but most of it was sold. He'd take it into town and most of it was sold, and that's, I remember one year, the grain was ready to pick. It was dry enough and it was ready to combine, and it was ready over the weekend, but my dad would never actually do farm work on Sundays. And so,
Because it was a day of
my older
rest.
brother,
Yeah.
Because it was a day of rest.
yeah, he and my older brother Dale decided they would not combine that wheat field on Sunday. They'd wait until Monday. And Sunday night they had a hailstorm and took it all.
Oh my gosh. The hail did?
Took it all. Well, the grain has to stand up. It has to be straight up if you're going to combine it. If
Right.
it's laying on the ground,
You can't
the
pick it up.
combine won't pick it up. And so that's
So
what
because
happened.
he didn't process it over the weekend, they lost that whole store?
Yeah. And he survived. My parents had a good life. They had an excellent life. They built a new home after they retired, after Dad retired. And he was always very grateful, very active in church. And, so.
They were very frugal people, you know, they used to clean and my grandma Molly could do anything in the kitchen, between baking a pie or making soap, you know, growing the garden.
I helped her make soap many occasions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Grandma wouldn't even use like her washer and dryer that were electric. She wanted to go out in the garage and she'd like crank out her laundry and hang it on the clothesline. Yeah, it's crazy.
Such a different time.
Yeah.
They were amazing people, and Grandpa was such a hard worker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They would hunt in the winter. They would get an elk when they do make sausage and stuff. The brothers would all get together and hang the sausage and make German sausage.
They would butcher their own beef and pig.
Butcher their own beef. And,
Yeah, Daddy always had a calf growing up in the barn area and a pasture that he was going to butcher. And so they did their own butchering. They did their own cutting. And we lived in a home. It was a remodeled. Daddy had it remodeled, and he had a freezer built into it, a walk-in freezer.
The one on the highway?
Huh?
The house on the highway?
Uh-huh. And
I remember it well.
It was big enough so that you could hang a quarter of beef or maybe 2 quarters of beef in just the cold area, and then on one end it was a freezer, and that's where we, after they butchered, they cut all the meat and wrapped it and labeled it and then stored it in the freezer.
How long could it store in there?
Well,
Did it eat it over a couple of months, or?
I think they would store for several days, maybe even a week before they would have to cut it. It kept it cold. It was an
It was
amazing.
chilly. I remember it. It was amazing. I was always amazed by it. I'm like,
How cold it was in there?
they made this down here in this basement. I always thought that was so bizarre.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Doug and I hung out
I
there.
actually saw a house for sale recently that had like a walk-in freezer. Like that's
Yeah, I was
super
like,
weird.
what? I know. I was like,
How is
How
it
else do you
designed?
store your cows?
To stay cold? Is it just dug deep enough in the ground that it's naturally cold there?
But
No, I think it was.
No, it
was
wasn't
refrigerated,
refrigerated. No, I don't think so. The cooler, the basement, it wasn't refrigerated. It was just underground, so it stayed cold, right?
oh no,
No, it was a freezer.
Oh, it was electric.
Oh.
it was. Okay.
We built it like that.
it was freezing
So it
cold.
was electric.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was plugged into electricity.
Yeah, he added
It
it.
was.
They grew up with
into the basement.